AITA for embarrassing my girlfriend after she left me for a richer man in public? My name is Tyler. I am 29 years old, and until recently, I was in a relationship with my ex-girlfriend, Samantha. We were together for almost 4 years, which is not a short time when you think about it. When we started dating, the first thing that caught my attention about her was her demeanor. Samantha had a very strong personality. She was outgoing, spoke with a lot of confidence, and always seemed to dominate any room she walked into. At that time, honestly, I saw it as a positive thing. I have always been quieter and more reserved, so her energy felt different and somehow attractive to me. I also liked that she spoke her mind without too many filters. Back then, I interpreted it as a sign of sincerity, as if she were someone who had no problem being completely honest. But over time, I started to notice that there was a very big difference between being direct and actually enjoying creating uncomfortable situations in front of other people. Samantha had a habit that at first seemed like a harmless joke, something you could take with a sense of humor. However, little by little, it stopped being funny and started to become quite uncomfortable. She liked to argue in public. And I am not talking about those minor couples disagreements that sometimes happen naturally. In her case, it was different. Many times, it gave the impression that she was almost intentionally looking for an audience. For example, when we went out to dinner and she did not like something, she did not wait until we were alone to bring it up. Instead, she commented on it out loud in front of everyone, the waiters, other tables, or even our own friends. Sometimes it all started with something really small, like me choosing a restaurant that was not exactly to her liking, but somehow she managed to turn that unimportant detail into a kind of spectacle. Tyler always picks the most basic places, she would say loudly enough while looking around, as if she wanted to make sure someone else heard her. I really do not understand how he still does not learn. The first few times, I reacted with a nervous laugh. I thought it was simply part of her sense of humor, but it did not take long before I realized she was not saying it as a joke. Her intention was for other people to hear it. On one occasion, I even mentioned to her that those kinds of situations made me feel quite uncomfortable. Her response, however, was the same as always. "And why are you embarrassed?" she asked me, shrugging her shoulders. "If it bothers you so much, then change." Her way of thinking was a bit strange. According to her logic, pointing out my supposed mistakes or flaws in front of other people was a way to motivate me to improve. As time went by, that behavior started to repeat itself more and more frequently. Whether she forgot to buy something from the grocery store, if I arrived 5 minutes late, or if I simply did not agree with one of her ideas, anything could turn into a scene in front of other people. There is one particular gathering that I remember quite well. We were with some of her friends chatting quietly about traveling when someone mentioned they were planning to take a tour of Europe. At that moment, Samantha burst out laughing and said something I still clearly remember. "Tyler could never afford a trip like that," she commented. "He is more of the staycation and watching Netflix type." Some people laughed, but it was an uncomfortable laugh. I also smiled out of courtesy, although inside I felt that weird sensation that appears when you know someone just crossed a line. Later, when we were finally alone, I told her that comment had bothered me, but her reaction was exactly the same as always. "Relax," she told me. "If it bothers you so much, then work harder and earn more money." Those kinds of phrases started appearing more frequently. Often it gave the impression that she needed to constantly prove that she was somehow above me. The funny thing is that outside of those situations, our relationship seemed pretty normal. We could spend quiet days at our apartment, watching movies, cooking together, or just going for a walk in the park. Those moments were pleasant and often made me think I might be overreacting. There was also the fact that we had been together for quite a long time. For years are not thrown away so easily. When a person invests so much time in a relationship, it is very easy to convince yourself that the problems are not as serious as they seem. Still, there was a recurring theme. Samantha loved being the center of attention, and often the fastest way to achieve it was by creating a little drama. At some gatherings, she even seemed to wait for the perfect moment to start an argument. I remember once one of my friends told me something that, at the time, I preferred not to take too seriously. "Your girlfriend has a special talent for turning any get-together into a spectacle." He said it half jokingly, but deep down there was a lot of truth in his words. Despite all that, I kept trying to make the relationship work, but everything started to change a few months ago when I lost my job. For 3 years, I had worked at a logistics company. It was not exactly my dream job, but it was stable and allowed me to live with some financial peace of mind. Unfortunately, the company started having financial problems, and in the end, they made the decision to downsize. I was one of the people who ended up laid off. It was not personal. That same day, several coworkers were also let go. Still, receiving news like that is never easy. When I got home and told Samantha, her reaction was not exactly what I expected. She was not angry, but she did not seem too worried about how I felt either. In fact, the first thing she asked me was quite direct. "So, what does the severance package look like?" I explained that I had a small financial cushion and that I was going to start looking for a job immediately. She simply nodded. "Well, I hope you do not take too long," she said. During the first few weeks, I dedicated myself entirely to looking for employment. Every day I sent out resumes, checked job boards like LinkedIn, and attended interviews when an opportunity arose. It was a tiring process, but also quite normal for anyone trying to find a job. However, Samantha started showing impatience very quickly. Barely a few days had passed when the sarcastic comments began. "Did you find anything today, or are we still in the soul-searching phase?" I tried not to give it too much importance. I thought maybe she was stressed and simply did not know how to express her concern in any other way. But those jokes started to repeat themselves more and more. One afternoon, while I was sitting in front of my laptop checking emails and sending job applications, she walked behind me and commented, "It is funny. I always thought you were more ambitious." At that moment, I preferred to say nothing. I was focused on the screen, sending applications, so I simply kept doing my thing. 2 weeks after losing my job, the situation started to get more tense. It was not because I had stopped looking for employment. In fact, I was doing the exact opposite. Every day, I sent more resumes, checked more offers, and tried to be as proactive as possible. But finding a job is not something that happens overnight. Anyone who has gone through that process knows perfectly well that 2 weeks is really nothing. However, to Samantha, those 2 weeks seemed like an eternity. One night we were having a quiet dinner when she brought up the topic again, using that tone I already knew too well. 2 weeks and nothing. Impressive. What really bothered me was not so much what she said, but the way she said it. It did not sound like concern or genuine interest. It was pure sarcasm. "I am looking every day," I answered calmly. "These things take time." She reacted by rolling her eyes with obvious annoyance. "Sure, I bet sending emails is very hard." I decided not to continue the conversation. I had no energy to get into another unnecessary argument. A couple of days later, one of our friends organized a small get-together at his house. It was nothing special, just a small group of people to chat for a while, have a drink, and spend the afternoon. It seemed like a good opportunity for me to get out a bit. I had been cooped up at home for several days sending job applications, checking emails, and looking at job listings, so a change of scenery would do me good. When we arrived at our friend's place, there were already about 8 or 9 people there. Some were mutual friends, while others were acquaintances of Samantha whom I had barely seen a couple of times. At first, everything felt completely normal. The atmosphere was relaxed, there was some chill music in the background, and people were chatting peacefully. Several people laughed while sharing stories or commenting on everyday things. During the first hour, everything went smoothly. Samantha, in fact, was in a very good mood. She moved around the room talking to everyone, telling anecdotes, and making witty comments that caused laughter. That was the version of her that most people knew, charismatic, confident, and very funny when she wanted to be. But after a while, the conversation took another turn. Someone started talking about work. One of our friends mentioned that his company was growing quite a bit, and they were hiring more people. From there, several people began to comment on how their jobs were going, the projects they were involved in, and some plans they had for next year. In the middle of that conversation, someone asked me a fairly simple question. "Tyler, how are things going for you at work?" I did not even have time to answer. Before I could open my mouth, Samantha let out a little laugh. It was not a kind or spontaneous laugh. It was that brief laugh someone makes right before saying something uncomfortable. "Oh, Tyler is exploring new opportunities," she said, stretching the words out in an exaggerated way. Some people smiled thinking it was a light-hearted joke. I tried to answer as naturally as possible. "I am looking for something new. I was laid off a couple of weeks ago, but I am already doing interviews." Samantha laughed again. This time it was a louder, more obvious laugh. Interviews, she repeated with a tone loaded with sarcasm. That is a very elegant way of saying he is unemployed. For a moment, the room fell silent. Someone quickly tried to change the subject, probably to avoid the awkward moment. But Samantha was not done yet. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and looked at me with a smile I knew too well. It was exactly the same expression that appeared just before one of her public scenes started. Although I suppose it makes sense, she continued. She made a brief, almost theatrical pause, as if to make sure everyone was paying attention. Tyler has always had a special talent for mediocrity. Several people looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Others simply looked down at their drinks, trying to avoid the uncomfortable moment. I felt that familiar mix of discomfort and frustration I had experienced other times, but this time something was different. Maybe it was the accumulated exhaustion of the last few weeks, or simply that I no longer had the patience I used to have to endure those kinds of comments. Still, I tried to stay calm. "Samantha," I said quietly, "there is no need to do this here." She raised her eyebrows with an exaggeratedly surprised expression. "What?" she replied. "I am just telling the truth." Then she looked around the room, clearly looking to capture everyone's attention. "In fact," she added with a sarcastic smile, "I think this is a good time to be completely honest." She paused briefly, almost theatrically. It was obvious she wanted everyone to hear what she was about to say. Then, in front of all our friends, she dropped something that completely changed the mood in the room. "I have been seriously thinking about breaking up with Tyler." Several people went completely still, but Samantha was not done yet. She rested her elbows on the table, looked me right in the eye, and kept talking with a calmness that seemed almost rehearsed. "Let us be honest," she said. "I do not want to spend my life with someone mediocre, and definitely not with someone with no money." The room fell into absolute silence, and just when it seemed like she had already said more than enough, she decided to finish it off with one last phrase that, in her head, probably sounded like the final blow. "So yes," she added, looking at the others, "I will probably leave him soon for someone who actually has money." Her words hung in the air, as if suddenly all the sound in the room had been turned off. Some of our friends avoided looking directly at me. Others watched Samantha with an obvious mix of surprise and discomfort. It was not the first time she had caused a public scene, but this time she had crossed a line she had never even approached before. And at that moment, I felt something inside me just break. For years I had put up with her comments, her sarcastic jokes, and those little humiliations she always disguised as honesty. I had always tried to stay calm. I never wanted to respond with the same aggressiveness. But that night was different. For the first time, I did not feel like keeping quiet, and to my own surprise, the first thing I did was laugh. It was not a nervous laugh like other times. It was a genuine laugh. Samantha frowned immediately. "What are you laughing at?" she asked, clearly annoyed. I settled back in my chair calmly and looked her right in the eye. "That is fine," I said with complete peace of mind. "Then leave." The room fell completely silent again. Samantha blinked a couple of times, as if my response was not what she expected to hear. For a moment, she seemed confused. Then a smile appeared on her face, but it was not a pleasant smile. It was that arrogant expression she used to wear when she thought she was in control of the situation. "You would not last a day without me," she said confidently. "So stop pretending to be brave." Interestingly, in that instant, I felt something I had not experienced in a long time. It was a kind of calm, a strange tranquility I had not felt in years. Maybe it was because, for the first time, I was not afraid of what might happen next. "Brave," I answered. "No, Samantha, the only thing I am doing is something I should have done a long time ago." She leaned slightly forward, watching me with a mocking smile. "Oh, really?" she asked with a sarcastic tone. "And what is that supposed to be?" I looked her straight in the eye before answering. "Realizing that being with you is a waste of time." Around the room, some discreet murmurs were heard. For a moment, Samantha stopped smiling. "Be careful what you say," she warned, now in a much colder tone. I shook my head gently. "No, Samantha. In fact, I think today is the perfect day to say everything I never said." She let out a little laugh. "Really?" she said. "Now the unemployed guy is going to give a speech." I felt a spark of anger, but at the same time, there was something stronger growing inside me. A feeling of liberation. "Do you know what your real problem is?" I asked. Go ahead, enlighten me, she answered sarcastically. That you think you are much more important than you really are. Sure, she answered ironically. And you are the perfect example of success? No, I answered calmly. But at least I am not a pathetic person who needs to humiliate their partner in public to feel superior. Her expression changed immediately. Pathetic? She repeated harshly. Yes, I said. Pathetic. The room was completely silent. Everyone watched the scene without saying anything. Samantha crossed her arms. Look who is talking, she said. The man who cannot even keep a job. At that moment, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. How funny you mentioned that, I answered. She raised an eyebrow with a mocking expression. What are you going to do now? Show us memes to defend yourself. I completely ignored the comment. I opened the email I had received barely an hour earlier. In fact, I had seen it while we were at the gathering, but had decided to review it calmly later. Now, however, seemed like the perfect time. I turned the phone toward her. Read this. Samantha looked at the screen with obvious annoyance. What is that? My new job, I replied. She frowned and took the phone reluctantly. For a few seconds, she stared at the screen while reading the message. I could see how her expression changed little by little. First, she seemed confused. Then her face reflected something close to disbelief. What is this? She finally asked. It is a job offer, I explained calmly. I just got hired at a production company. What kind of production company? She asked. A digital media production company. Hearing that, several people looked up with interest. I have a degree in film, I continued. Something you curiously forgot to mention while putting on your little show. Samantha looked at the phone again. Cameraman, she muttered. Exactly, I replied. And the starting salary is almost double what I was making before. Her expression changed again. This time she looked uncomfortable. That does not mean anything, she said. I let out a small laugh. It does not mean anything. It could be fake, she added. Sure, I replied ironically. Because everyone makes up hiring emails just to ruin your dramatic moment. Some people around the room began to murmur among themselves. Samantha placed the phone on the table with a small thud. Even so, she said, that does not change what I said. I stared at her. No, Samantha. What changes is that now your whole speech sounds even more ridiculous. She clenched her jaw. Ridiculous? Yes. I leaned slightly forward. You just put on a whole show saying you are going to leave me for someone with money on the exact same day I get a job where I am going to make almost double. Someone let out a nervous laugh. Samantha immediately turned to that person. What is so funny? Then she looked back at me. That does not change who you are. You are right, I answered. It does not change who I am. I paused briefly before continuing. But it makes it pretty clear who you are. She narrowed her eyes. And who am I, according to you? I looked at her with a calmness that surprised even me. A superficial, arrogant, and, to be honest, quite miserable person. Go to hell, she spat. The funny thing, I continued, is that you have been behaving like a prize for years. Samantha let out a bitter laugh. Oh, really? She said. Well, listen closely to this, Tyler. She smiled coldly. I can find someone better than you in a week. Do it, I answered. I looked her right in the eye. In fact, I encourage you to do it. She opened her mouth to reply, but I interrupted her before she could say anything. But before you keep talking, let us get something clear. The room went completely silent again. You are not a prize. Samantha glared at me furiously. You are an unbearable woman who thinks money defines a person's worth. And you are a loser, she replied immediately. I shrugged. Maybe, but at least I am not a person so empty that they need to humiliate others just to feel important. The tension was obvious. Besides, I continued, you speak as if you were the most desired woman in the world, as if finding someone better were the easiest thing on the planet. I paused briefly, but I honestly do not think it will be that easy for you. Her face started to turn red with rage. Your friend Ashley would probably have a much easier time, I added. Every time she shows up, she steals all the attention from you. You, on the other hand, well, let us just say you are not exactly in your prime anymore. Samantha was furious. You are an idiot and you are incredibly arrogant. No one intervened. No one said anything. Everyone watched. Do you know what the most ironic thing about all this is? I asked. Samantha did not answer immediately. You have spent years trying to make me feel small, I continued. I made a brief pause before speaking again. But tonight, funnily enough, you achieved exactly the opposite. She clenched her fists tightly. Oh, really? She asked defiantly. I settled back calmly in my chair. Yes, because for the first time in a long time, I realized something very simple. Samantha stared at me with a mix of rage and bewilderment. Realized what exactly? I looked her straight in the eyes. That losing you would be no loss at all. The room fell completely silent again. In fact, I added calmly, it would be a huge improvement in my life. Samantha was breathing heavily, clearly angry. You are a damn ingrate. I shook my head slightly. No, I am simply someone who finally got tired of all this. No one said anything. No one moved. The tension in the room was so thick you could almost feel it in the air. Samantha watched me for several seconds without looking away, and then something unexpected happened. Her expression changed. The arrogant confidence she had shown at the beginning of the night was no longer present with the same intensity. She still had a hard look, but it was obvious that the situation was no longer completely under her control. After a few seconds, she took a deep breath. This is not over, she said. No one replied. She looked directly at me again. Are you with me or not? Several people frowned upon hearing that question, but Samantha continued talking as if it were perfectly normal. You are going to have to earn my forgiveness. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Your forgiveness? I asked. Samantha nodded with complete seriousness. Yes, because you just humiliated me in front of everyone. The sentence was so absurd that I could not help but laugh again. It was not a friendly laugh. It was a short, incredulous laugh. No, I finally replied. This is over. Samantha narrowed her eyes. Do not say stupid things. I shook my head. The truth is I should have sent you packing a long time ago. Several people looked down when they heard that. I got up from my chair. But anyway, I said while grabbing my jacket. Congratulations. Samantha frowned. Congratulations? For what? I looked at her one last time. Because you finally got your show. After saying that, I turned around and walked toward the door. I had no intention of arguing any further. I had spent too much time putting up with those kinds of scenes, and for the first time in years, I felt complete clarity. I did not want to stay in that relationship. But as soon as I reached the door, I heard footsteps behind me. Tyler. It was Samantha. I ignored her and kept walking toward the driveway. Tyler, wait. I left the house and headed straight for my car. When I opened the door, she finally caught up with me. This is not over, she said firmly. I turned to look at her. Yes, it is over. No, she insisted. It was just a fight. It was not a fight. Of course it was. I shook my head. No, Samantha. It was the end. She crossed her arms. Are you exaggerating? No. I paused before continuing. Couples argue. That is normal. But normal couples do not announce in front of 10 people that they are going to leave their partner for someone with more money. She stayed silent for a moment. I was just angry. No, I replied. You were just being yourself. Her expression hardened again. We can fix this. I opened the car door. I do not want to fix it, Samantha. I sat in the driver's seat. She took another step toward the door. It was just an argument, she insisted. Tomorrow we can talk calmly, and that will be it. I looked at her one last time before replying. There will be no tomorrow for this. She frowned. Do not be ridiculous. Goodbye, Samantha. I closed the car door and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw her in the rearview mirror. She was standing under the yellowish light of a street lamp, watching me leave. She did not try to stop me again. At that moment, I thought everything had ended there, but I was wrong. During the following days, text messages started to arrive. At first, they were long and tried to downplay what had happened. It was just an argument. All couples argue. You do not have to exaggerate so much. Then the tone changed. You are being immature. After everything I did for you, the least you could do is talk to me. I did not reply to any of them. I had no interest in entering that cycle again or continuing to fuel the conflict. 2 days later, something different happened. Samantha started posting things on social media. Sad memes, dramatic quotes about betrayal, and posts along the lines of, some people do not value those who were always there for them. Other times she wrote things like, I wish you knew how much it hurts to lose someone. At first, I ignored it, but some friends started sending me screenshots. She also uploaded many stories. In some, she appeared listening to sad music, in others looking out the window or writing long texts full of drama. I still did not reply. A week later, she finally called me. I was at home reviewing some paperwork related to my new job when her name appeared on the phone screen. I let it ring. She called again, and then again. On the fourth call, I decided to answer. "What do you want?" For a few seconds, there was no answer. Then I heard her voice. "Baby." I sighed tiredly. "Do not call me that." There was a brief pause. "I am sorry," she finally said. "What do you want?" I repeated. I heard her take a deep breath. "I am sorry about what happened." I did not answer. "I cannot be without you," she continued. "I have been thinking a lot these days." I remained silent. Honestly, I messed up. It was a stupid thing to do. Yes. There was another moment of silence. Then she said something that made it pretty clear that, deep down, she had not changed much. "But you also exaggerated." It almost made me laugh. "Right." Her voice tensed up a bit. "If we do not get back together, you are going to regret it." "I do not think so. I am serious." "So am I." A few seconds passed without either of us saying anything. Then she made a highly manipulative statement, crossing a serious line to try and force my hand. Silence set in again. Those kinds of threats were not something new to me. I had heard similar stories before from friends who had gone through toxic breakups, so I knew exactly what she was trying to do. It was pure manipulation, a way of using fear as a tool to regain control of the situation. I took a calm breath before answering her. "Do whatever you want," I said. Nothing was heard on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then I added something else with the same calmness. "I am not going to let you hold me hostage like this." There was a long silence. Then, without saying another word, she hung up, and curiously enough, she never reached out again. Several months have passed since then, and as I imagined, absolutely nothing happened. There were no tragedies, no dramatic scenes, or anything like what she had insinuated on that call. Samantha is still around. Every now and then, I bump into her around the city. We do not live in a huge place here, so sooner or later, you always end up running into familiar faces. I have seen her a few times in coffee shops or walking downtown. Once we even crossed paths in a store, and she walked right in front of me. She looked at me. I simply ignored her and went on with what I was doing. I do not feel hate toward her, but I do not feel nostalgia either. Actually, what I feel is something I had not experienced in a long time while I was in that relationship. Peace of mind. Sometimes I think about how ironic everything turned out to be. She wanted to put on a big show to humiliate me in front of everyone. But in the end, the only thing she achieved was to clearly show who she really was, and accidentally give me the definitive push I needed to walk away for good. Comment. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's video. Sometimes the hardest part of any relationship is recognizing when it is time to walk away for the sake of your own mental health. We often tolerate disrespect because we confuse longevity with loyalty, holding on to a situation simply because we have invested years in it. True love and partnership should always be built on a foundation of mutual respect, support, and kindness. You absolutely deserve someone who builds you up in public and cheers for your success behind closed doors. Setting clear boundaries is not an act of anger, but a profound step towards self-respect and personal healing. Walking away from an unhealthy environment is often the bravest decision you can make for your future. I hope this serves as a gentle reminder to always choose peace of mind over constant conflict. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.